The ballroom at the Grand Meridian Hotel shimmered under golden chandeliers, their light reflecting off crystal glasses and the polished smiles of San Francisco's healthcare elite. I stood near the edge of the crowd, smoothing down my navy dress, the most expensive piece of clothing I owned, purchased specifically for nights like this. The room hummed with the practiced chatter of executives, discussing mergers and quarterly projections as if they were casual observations about the weather. My clinic, Carter Rehabilitation and Wellness, was being celebrated tonight. At least, that's what the embossed invitation had promised. "Natalie!" Jonathan Reeves's voice cut through the crowd. My boss, though I'd never thought of him that way until recently, waved me over with a champagne flute, balanced between his manicured fingers. "Come join us." We were just discussing the future. Jonathan was 52, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. His company, Reeves Healthcare Solutions, had approached me 6 months ago with promises of expansion, resources, and support for my small but growing physical therapy clinic. "The woman of the hour," Jonathan announced as I approached. He placed his hand on my shoulder, a gesture that might have seemed friendly to observers, but felt possessive to me. "Everyone, this is Natalie Carter, the talented therapist behind our newest acquisition." Acquisition! The word stung. My clinic wasn't an acquisition. It was my life's work, built from nothing but student debt and determination. "We're discussing the management restructure," Jonathan continued. "Kylie here has some fascinating ideas for modernization." Kylie Reeves, Jonathan's niece, smiled at me with lips as thin as paper cuts. At 26, she was immaculately dressed in a designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her resume consisted of a marketing degree from an Ivy League school and the advantage of being a Reeves. "I was thinking we could digitize everything," she said, waving her hand as if manually writing patient notes was something from the Stone Age. "Maybe add a juice bar in the waiting area. Patients love that wellness vibe." I forced a smile. "Our patients are mostly elderly or recovering from serious injuries. They need focused care, not green juice." Jonathan laughed, too loudly. "Always the practical one, our Natalie." Our Natalie. As if I were a shared commodity. The evening progressed with increasing discomfort. Executives I'd never met clapped me on the back and congratulated me on joining the Reeves family. Photographers circled, capturing Jonathan and Kylie standing proudly beside me, their arms positioned to suggest guidance and mentorship rather than what this really was, a slow, calculated takeover. By 9 o'clock, Jonathan tapped his glass with a silver spoon. The room quieted as he moved to the head of the main table, commanding attention with practiced ease. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, his voice resonating through the ballroom, "it gives me great pride to announce that my niece, Kylie Reeves, will be managing Natalie Carter's medical clinic under our corporate partnership. She brings fresh vision and family values into the business." His gaze found me across the room, and for a brief moment, I glimpsed the satisfaction in his eyes. "And of course, Natalie will retain 25% of the profit." Applause filled the room. Executives clapped like they'd just witnessed a promotion instead of a theft. My stomach turned as Kylie flashed her practiced smile, already victorious. 25% of my own clinic. The clinic I had built from nothing while working double shifts and sleeping on treatment tables when I couldn't make rent. But I didn't smile. I didn't clap. Instead, I walked deliberately to where my leather briefcase rested against my chair. The room continued applauding as I approached the head table, briefcase in hand. Jonathan's smile faltered slightly as I placed it on the polished mahogany surface. With steady hands that betrayed none of the anger churning inside me, I flicked open the clasps and pulled out a folder. The applause began to die down, curious murmurs replacing it as I slid a paper toward James Porter, the company lawyer seated to Jonathan's right. "Clause 4.3, I said, my voice cutting through the dwindling applause, states that full ownership rights remain mine, and no family member can assume a management position without unanimous board approval." I looked directly at Jonathan, holding his gaze. "And Jonathan, you are not on the board." The silence that followed was absolute. James Porter adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and nodded. "She's correct. The contract is binding." Jonathan froze, his jaw clenched, his face drained of color. The mighty CEO, the man who had humiliated me in front of 100 executives, had nothing to say. Kylie's victorious smile slipped, replaced by confusion and then embarrassment. And in that silence, that perfect, vindicating silence, I felt years of sacrifice, humiliation, and struggle being repaid. with a single stroke of justice. I closed my briefcase with a decisive click. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said quietly, and walked out of the ballroom with my head held high, leaving behind a room full of shocked executives and one speechless boss who had just learned what it meant to underestimate the wrong woman. My story didn't start under chandeliers and applause. It began in a cramped, apartment in Boston with nothing but ramen noodles, unpaid student loans, and a dream. The winter of 2015 was particularly brutal. Snow piled against my apartment window, and the ancient heater struggled to keep the temperature above freezing. I sat cross-legged on my bed, which doubled as my couch, surrounded by textbooks, a half-eaten cup of instant noodles balanced precariously on my anatomy. Textbook. I was 24, halfway through physical therapy school, and exhausted beyond measure. That morning, I'd worked a 6-hour shift at the hospital cafeteria before rushing to clinical rotations, where I'd spend another 8 hours helping patients recover from strokes, surgeries, and accidents. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. "Did you get the money I sent?" The money, $50, scraped together from her housekeeping job. Pride made me want to refuse it, but necessity forced my hand. My parents couldn't afford to help with tuition, but they sent what they could, despite my protests. "Got it. Thanks. Love you," I texted back, not mentioning that it had already gone toward yesterday's overdue electric bill. I glanced at the vision board above my desk, magazine cutouts of a small but modern physical therapy clinic, pictures of smiling patients, and one word written in bold marker: mine. Not borrowed, not rented, not co-owned. Mine. Dr. Marshall, my program director, had pulled me aside after class last week. "You've got the highest technical scores in the program, Natalie," he'd said, "but you need to be realistic about your goals." "I'm going to open my own clinic," I'd replied with the certainty of someone who hadn't yet learned how the world worked. He'd smiled kindly. "In this industry, it's who you know, not just what you know. Have you considered working for one of the big healthcare corporations? Competitive salary, benefits, mentorship?" I knew what he meant. Give up your dream, be practical, accept your place. But practicality hadn't gotten me this far. Stubborn determination had. Working through high school to save for college, applying for every scholarship, taking night classes while working full-time, sleeping 4 hours a night. This dream wasn't just a whim, it was the culmination of every sacrifice I'd made. 3 years later, I stood in an empty storefront in a modest Boston neighborhood, keys clutched in my hand. The space was small, just 3 rooms and a tiny reception area, but the possibilities seemed endless. The realtor had looked doubtful when I'd first inquired. "It's not exactly prime medical real estate," she'd warned. "It's perfect," I'd insisted. Perfect because it was all I could afford with my small business loan and the savings I'd scraped together during my first year working at Boston General. My friend Eliza stood beside me, surveying the space with practical eyes. "The electrical needs updating," she noted, "and that bathroom is definitely not ADA compliant." "I know," I sighed, "but it's a start." Eliza squeezed my shoulder. "A damned good one." Over the next month, every spare minute and dollar went into transformations. I painted walls during midnight hours after hospital shifts. My Uncle Carlos, a handyman, helped install railings and make the bathroom accessible, accepting home-cooked meals as payment. My cousin Miguel designed a simple website, and my former classmate Jen agreed to work part-time at a reduced rate until we could afford more. When Carter Rehabilitation and Wellness finally opened its doors, we had exactly 3 scheduled patients in our first week. I spent the empty hours calling doctors' offices, introducing myself, and practically begging for referrals. "Dr. Hendricks doesn't take calls from providers," one receptionist informed me coldly. "Please," I persisted. "I specialize in post-operative recovery for joint replacements. His patients could benefit from— I'll pass along your information." Click. Slowly, though, things began to change. An elderly man came in for hip replacement recovery and told his bridge club about the young therapist who actually listened. A college athlete I treated returned to her team weeks ahead of schedule. A local pediatrician stopped by, evaluated my pediatric equipment, and began sending her young patients with developmental delays. By our 6-month mark, we were booked 2 weeks out. By our first anniversary, I had hired 2 more therapists and expanded our hours. The clinic wasn't making me rich. Most months, after paying staff and expenses, I took home just enough to cover my own bills. But it was growing. It was working. It was mine. And then Jonathan Reeves appeared. His arrival wasn't dramatic. Just a man in an expensive suit walking through my clinic doors one Tuesday afternoon. But it changed everything. "Ms. Carter?" he asked, approaching the front desk where I was filling out insurance forms during a rare, quiet moment. Jonathan Reeves, Reeves Healthcare Solutions. I've heard impressive things about your little clinic. Little. The word sounded both condescending and accurate coming from him. Thank you, I said, extending my hand. What can I do for you, Mr. Reeves? His smile was practiced, perfect. I think the better question is what I can do for you. Jonathan Reeves wasn't just visiting, he was hunting. I recognized the look. I'd seen it on the faces of larger hospital administrators eyeing successful independent practices. They didn't see patient care or community trust. They saw market share and profit margins. Would you like to discuss this in your office? He asked, glancing around my modest reception area where a young mother was helping her child with therapy exercises. This is fine, I replied, gesturing to a small consultation table. I didn't mention that my office was barely more than a desk behind a partition. What exactly did you have in mind, Mr. Reeves? Please, call me Jonathan. He settled into a chair, unbuttoning his suit, jacket with practiced ease. I'll be direct, Natalie. Reeves Healthcare Solutions has been expanding our rehabilitation network across New England. Your outcomes have caught our attention. Post-surgical recovery times for your patients are averaging 15% better than industry standard. I blinked, surprised he had that information. We focus on individualized care plans. And it's working. He leaned forward slightly. But imagine what you could accomplish with better resources, cutting-edge equipment, marketing support, a proper facility. We're doing fine, I said, defensive despite myself. Fine, yes. But you could be extraordinary. He pulled out a leather portfolio and removed a glossy brochure. This is our Portland clinic, state-of-the-art equipment, research, partnerships with medical universities, a staff of 20 specialists. It was a 2-room clinic like yours 3 years ago. The photographs showed everything I'd dreamed about. Spacious treatment areas, hydrotherapy pools, advanced rehabilitation technology. My heart tugged with yearning, but caution kept my expression neutral. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. A partnership. He smiled. We provide capital, administrative support, marketing, compliance oversight, expansion planning, all the business aspects that drain your time and energy. You focus on patient care and clinical excellence. We grow together. It sounded perfect. Too perfect. And ownership? I asked, the question that mattered most. You maintain ownership of your practice, he assured me smoothly. We create a management agreement. You keep clinical control. We handle business operations. Your name, your vision, our resources. For 2 weeks, I deliberated. I discussed it with my small staff, who were excited about better equipment and potential salary increases. I consulted with a lawyer I could barely afford, who reviewed the initial proposal and found it surprisingly equitable for this type of arrangement. Finally, I agreed to a meeting at Reeves's Boston office. The contrast between our facilities couldn't have been more stark. Their reception area was larger than my entire clinic, with leather furnishings and original artwork adorning the walls. The conference room where we met overlooked the Charles River through floor-to-ceiling windows. Jonathan introduced me to his team: legal, counsel, marketing directors, financial analysts. I'd brought only my determination and a notebook filled with questions. We spent hours reviewing terms, projections, and plans. One thing is non-negotiable, I said firmly when we reached the ownership section. I maintain full ownership rights and final say on all clinical matters. James Porter, their sleek corporate lawyer, looked to Jonathan, who nodded almost imperceptibly. We can draft language to that effect, Porter agreed, making notes. Let's call it Clause 4.3. Full ownership and clinical authority remain with Dr. Carter. Ms. Carter, I corrected. I'm not a physician. Of course, he replied, making the correction without looking up. By the time I left that evening, we had the framework of an agreement. I felt simultaneously exhilarated and terrified. Was I selling out? Or was I smart enough to recognize the opportunity of a lifetime? The transformation began almost immediately after signing. Within 3 months, my clinic had moved to a space 3 times larger. New equipment arrived weekly. Marketing materials with professionally designed logos appeared. Insurance claims that had previously taken me hours to process were handled by a dedicated team. For the first time, I could focus entirely on patients. My clinical staff expanded to include specialists in sports medicine, geriatrics, and pediatric therapy. Patient volume doubled, then tripled. This is what I dreamed about, I told Eliza during a rare night out, 6 months into the partnership. I can actually practice the way I was trained to, without worrying about whether we can afford new ultrasound equipment or if the insurance company will deny half our claims. It does seem perfect, she agreed, though I detected hesitation in her voice. Just be careful, Nat. Corporate healthcare has different priorities than independent practitioners. Jonathan understands my vision, I insisted. The agreement protects my clinical autonomy. Eliza sipped her wine. And the business side? The finances? That's their expertise. I shrugged. I get monthly reports. Revenue is up 60%. But do you understand the reports? The allocations? The corporate structure? I didn't. Not really. The financial statements were increasingly complex, filled with terms like cross-collateralized assets and management overhead allocations that made my eyes glaze over. But our patients were thriving, and my clinical staff was growing. I trust them, I said with more confidence than I felt. That's the whole point of the partnership. Eliza nodded but didn't look convinced. The first sign of trouble came 8 months in. I arrived at the clinic one morning to find a young woman being shown around by Jonathan's executive assistant. Natalie. Jonathan emerged from what had once been my office but was now designated as the executive consultation suite. Perfect timing. I'd like you to meet my niece, Kylie Reeves. She's joining our management team as part of her executive development program. Kylie Reeves extended a manicured hand. So great to meet you. Uncle John has told me all about your clinical work. Welcome, I said, shaking her hand while trying to process this information. No one had mentioned adding management staff, especially not family members of the CEO. What will your role be? Kylie will be learning all aspects of clinic management, Jonathan explained smoothly. Shadowing our operations, understanding our partnership model. Think of her as a management resident. Over the next few weeks, Kylie was everywhere, observing administrative meetings, asking questions about patient scheduling, reviewing billing procedures. She had an MBA but no healthcare experience. She constantly referred to the clinic as ours, in a way that made my skin crawl. We should consider a complete digital rebrand, she announced during a staff meeting, scrolling through her tablet. The current aesthetic is a bit clinical. We want to project wellness, vitality. It's a medical clinic, I pointed out. Clinical is appropriate. Research shows patients respond better to environments that feel less institutional, she countered, not looking up from her screen. I've prepared a proposal for updating our look and feel. Our look. Our feel. As if my clinic's identity was a social media profile in need of filters. The most troubling change was in Jonathan's behavior. He began scheduling meetings without me, making decisions that affected clinical operations without consultation. The monthly financial reports grew increasingly opaque, with larger percentages allocated to administrative oversight and corporate development. When I questioned these changes, Jonathan's responses were always the same. Trust the process, Natalie. This is how growth works. Or more dismissively, that's why you partnered with us, so you don't have to worry about business details. But I was worried, increasingly so. The corporate invasion was subtle at first, like beach erosion that seems insignificant until you realize half the shoreline has disappeared. Each week brought new initiatives from Reeves, healthcare that gradually pushed me further from the center of my own clinic. It began with small things. Patient intake forms were redesigned without my input. The warm, earthy color scheme I'd carefully selected for its calming effect was replaced with the corporate blue and silver palette. Staff began receiving memos about standardized protocols that contradicted the individualized approach I'd built my practice on. Is everything all right? Laura Kim, our HR director, asked one afternoon after a particularly tense meeting where Kylie had presented a modernization plan that would reduce appointment times by 15 minutes. I'm fine, I replied automatically, gathering my notes. Laura lingered after others had left. Unlike most of the corporate personnel who'd been assigned to the clinic, Laura actually seemed to care about our mission. She'd been with Reeves Healthcare for 5 years, but maintained a refreshing directness that cut through corporate speak. You're not fine, she said quietly. And you shouldn't be. What's happening here isn't right. I glanced up, surprised by her frankness. What do you mean? She closed the door and sat across from me. I've seen this before. The slow push, the gradual replacement, making you feel like you're being unreasonable for questioning decisions about your own practice. My throat tightened. Having someone acknowledge what I'd been feeling for months was both validating and terrifying. They're bringing in 3 more corporate managers next month, she continued. People with connections to the Reeves family but no healthcare experience. Meanwhile, Your authority is being systematically reduced. The agreement protects my clinical autonomy, I said, the mantra I'd been repeating to myself for weeks. Have you reviewed the full contract recently? All amendments and appendices? When I didn't immediately respond, she nodded knowingly. That's what I thought. Natalie, I've been with enough healthcare acquisitions to recognize the pattern. They're setting you up to be a figurehead, the founder whose name adds credibility, but who has no real power. That night, I pulled out the contract, the full contract, including all attachments and amendments I'd signed over the past year. I spread the papers across my dining table and began reading, really reading, the legal language I'd skimmed before. Most of it was standard corporate jargon, but buried in the amendments were troubling clauses, decision-making authorities that had shifted from clinic founder to management team, revenue allocations that increasingly favored corporate overhead, gradual reductions in my voting power for operational changes. But Clause 4.3 remained intact. Full ownership rights remain with Natalie Carter, and no family member can assume a management position without unanimous board approval. The board consisted of myself, Dr. Marcus Way, a respected orthopedic surgeon who referred patients to us, and Eliza, who I'd appointed as a patient advocate. None of us had approved Kylie's position. None of us had even been consulted. The next day, I requested a meeting with Jonathan. His assistant informed me he was traveling, but could fit me in next week. I insisted on speaking with him immediately. After 30 minutes of persistence, he finally called. Natalie, what's so urgent it couldn't wait until I'm back in Boston? His voice held the slightest edge of irritation. Kylie's position, I said, dispensing with pleasantries. It violates Clause 4.3 of our agreement. No family member can assume management without board approval. A pause. Kylie isn't in management. She's in training. She's making management decisions. She's presenting herself as management to our staff. That's a misperception. We'll clarify her role when I return. His tone suggested the matter was closed. Anything else? Yes. The financial reports show increasing allocations to corporate overhead without all explanation, and patient appointment times are being reduced against my recommendation. Natalie, his voice softened to the tone one might use with a child. These are standard operational adjustments. Every clinic in our network follows these protocols. Your clinical outcomes remain excellent. Isn't that what matters most to you? He'd found my weakness, my devotion to patient care, and was using it against me. Of course, outcomes mattered, but so did the soul of what I'd built. We need to discuss this in person, I insisted, with the full board present. Of course, he agreed too readily. When I return. In the meantime, try to keep an open mind about these changes. They're helping us scale your vision to help more patients. The conversation left me unsettled. I reached out to Eliza and Dr. Way, sharing my concerns and the contract language. Both were disturbed by what they heard. They've been systematically sidelining you, Dr. Way observed. Classic corporate takeover strategy. Make the founder feel obsolete while extracting their knowledge and reputation. What should I do? I asked, feeling more lost than I had since opening the clinic. Document everything, Eliza advised. Every meeting, every decision made without your input, every violation of the contract, and find an ally inside their organization. Laura Kim became that ally. Over lunch at a cafe far from the clinic, she provided crucial insights into Reeves's corporate strategy. Jonathan is planning something big, she revealed. There's a major investor dinner next month. He's been talking about new leadership for your clinic. The invitation list includes everyone who's anyone in healthcare private equity. He can't replace me, I insisted. The contracts can be interpreted in many ways, she interrupted, or amended or challenged. What you need is leverage. What kind of leverage? Information, documentation, and a clear understanding of your legal position. She hesitated, then added, I can help you, but it's risky for me. I need this job. Why would you take that risk? I asked. Her expression hardened. Because I've watched too many good clinicians get pushed out of practices they built. Because patients suffer when care becomes just another commodity. And honestly, because Jonathan Reeves represents everything wrong with corporate healthcare. Together, we began gathering evidence. Laura provided internal memos and financial analyses that revealed the true nature of Reeves's plans. I documented every decision that violated my clinical authority. We reviewed every line of the contract, identifying vulnerabilities and strengths. The investor dinner Laura had mentioned was scheduled for March 15th at the Grand Meridian Hotel. According to The invitation Laura showed me, it would be celebrating the expansion of Carter Rehabilitation and Wellness under new executive leadership. I wasn't listed as a speaker. I wasn't even mentioned in the program. But my name, my clinic's name, was prominently featured in all materials. That night, staring at the ceiling of my apartment, I made a decision. I would attend that dinner. I would bring the contract. And I would be prepared for whatever Jonathan Reeves had planned. "You can't just show up," Laura warned when I told her. "This is a carefully choreographed event. Jonathan will have prepared for every contingency." "Not every contingency," I replied, thinking of Clause 4.3. Not me. The 3 weeks leading up to the investor dinner passed in a blur of preparation and mounting tension. Each day at the clinic felt like navigating hostile territory, as Jonathan's influence grew increasingly obvious. New administrative staff appeared without introduction. Clinical decisions were questioned by people with MBAs but no medical training, and patient scheduling was adjusted to prioritize high-revenue services over clinical need. Through it all, I maintained a calm facade while working, feverishly behind the scenes with Laura, Eliza, and Dr. Wei. We met after hours at Eliza's apartment, spreading documents across her living room floor like detectives piecing together evidence. "The financial reports show a deliberate pattern," Dr. Wei noted, examining spreadsheets Laura had quietly exported. "They've been gradually reclassifying clinic revenue as network services to reduce your profit share. And look at this," Eliza added, holding up an email Laura had forwarded. "They've already drafted a press release announcing Kylie Reeves as the new managing director of Carter Rehabilitation and Wellness, effective after the investor dinner." My stomach tightened. "They're planning to announce this as a done deal." Laura nodded grimly. "Jonathan believes you won't challenge him publicly. His whole strategy depends on your discomfort with confrontation." She wasn't wrong. Throughout my career, I'd avoided conflict, choosing to prove my worth through results rather than arguments. Even when professors had dismissed my ambitions, I'd responded by outperforming expectations rather than defending myself verbally. "That's why this will work," I said, reaching for the original contract. "He doesn't expect me to fight back, especially not in front of his investors and business associates." "But are you prepared to?" Dr. Wei asked, studying me carefully. "A public confrontation with someone like Jonathan Reeves could get ugly." The question gave me pause. Was I ready? The thought of standing up in that ballroom, challenging Jonathan before his peers and potential investors made my heart race. I'd built my career on quiet competence, not dramatic showdowns. "I have to be," I finally answered. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about my staff, my patients, everything we've built together." Eliza squeezed my hand. "Then we need to make sure you're unassailable." Over the next week, we meticulously developed our strategy. Laura provided the guest list for the dinner and seating arrangements, giving us crucial information about who would be present and where they would be positioned. Dr. Wei contacted James Porter, ostensibly to discuss a patient's legal case, but really to confirm his understanding of Clause 4.3. "Porter knows the clause is binding," Dr. Wei reported after their conversation. "He actually advised Jonathan against trying to circumvent it, but was overruled." This information was invaluable. If even Reeves's own lawyer acknowledged the validity of my position, my case was stronger than I'd hoped. 2 days before the dinner, I received my formal invitation, a thick cream envelope with gold embossing that listed me merely as a special guest, rather than the founder of the clinic being celebrated. The slight was deliberate, another attempt to diminish my position. The night before the event, I met Laura for a final review of our plan. "Remember, timing is everything," she emphasized as we sat in a quiet corner of a cafe, far from both the clinic and Reeves' headquarters. "Let him make the announcement. Let the applause happen. The contrast between his moment of triumph and your evidence will be more powerful that way." "And you're sure you won't be implicated?" I asked, concerned for her position. Laura shrugged. "I've updated my resume. Some things matter more than job security." Her courage bolstered mine. Here was someone risking her livelihood for principles, while I had hesitated to defend what was legally mine. "One more thing," Laura added, sliding a slim folder across the table. "Financial projections for the clinic under Kylie's management. They're planning to reduce staff by 30%, eliminate low-income patient programs, and triple executive compensation. I thought you should know exactly what you're fighting against." I reviewed the documents with growing dismay. The clinic Jonathan described in press releases, innovative, patient-centered, community-focused, bore no resemblance to what these spreadsheets revealed. In Kylie's vision, my clinic would become a profit extraction machine, serving wealthy clients while abandoning the community patients I'd committed to helping. "Thank you," I said, tucking the folder into my briefcase alongside the contract. "For everything." She nodded. "Just promise me one thing. When you succeed tomorrow, and you will succeed, remember that not everyone at Reeves supports Jonathan's methods. Some of us still believe healthcare should be about healing, not quarterly returns." On the night of the dinner, I arrived at the Grand Meridian Hotel 30 minutes early, my heart pounding as the taxi pulled up to the entrance. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. A tailored navy dress that was professional but understated, accented only by my grandmother's pearl earrings, a reminder of the woman who'd taught me that dignity wasn't about wealth, but about unwavering self-respect. My leather briefcase felt impossibly heavy as I checked in and received my name badge, which listed me simply as Natalie Carter, guest, without any mention of my position. Another slight, another erasure. The ballroom was already filling, with healthcare executives, investors, and Reeves corporate staff when I entered. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over tables adorned with elaborate flower arrangements. A string quartet played softly in one corner. Everything spoke of wealth, influence, and calculated impression management. I spotted Jonathan holding court near the bar, Kylie at his side in a designer dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Neither noticed me as I made my way to my assigned table, positioned far from the main stage, another deliberate choice to minimize my presence. As I took my seat, I noticed James Porter at a nearby table, reviewing notes while nursing a scotch. Our eyes met briefly, and I detected a flicker of discomfort in his expression before he looked away. "Natalie? Carter?" A woman approached my table, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Susan Chen. Your work on post-stroke rehabilitation protocols is impressive." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by the recognition. "I was hoping to discuss potential research collaboration," she continued, "especially now that your clinic is expanding. The outcomes data you've published shows promise for wider application." Before I could respond, a chime sounded, signaling guests to take their seats for dinner. Dr. Chen handed me her card before departing. "Let's talk soon. Your methodologies deserve wider implementation." Her words strengthened my resolve. The work we did at the clinic wasn't just business. It was changing lives, advancing treatment approaches, making a difference that extended beyond our walls. That was what Jonathan couldn't understand and what Kylie would never prioritize. Dinner progressed through multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. I barely tasted the food, my attention focused on the head table where Jonathan periodically stood to chat with various executives and investors. Several times I caught him gesturing in my direction while speaking to others, presenting me as an asset in his portfolio rather than a partner. Finally, after dessert plates had been cleared, Jonathan approached the podium at the front of the room. Conversations quieted as he tapped the microphone, his confident smile illuminated by subtle spotlight. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for joining us on this momentous evening. Reeves Healthcare Solutions has always prided itself on identifying exceptional clinical talent and providing the business infrastructure to help that talent reach its full potential and maximum market impact. Market impact, not patient outcomes, not community health. The distinction spoke volumes. Tonight we celebrate one such success story," he continued. Carter Rehabilitation and Wellness began as a small neighborhood clinic with promising methodologies. Under our guidance, it has evolved into a regional leader in rehabilitation services with revenues exceeding projections by 42% in just 1 year. Polite applause rippled through the room. Jonathan gestured toward Kylie, who stood and moved to join him at the podium. "Success requires the right leadership," he continued. "Technical skill must be paired with business, acumen, and vision. That's why it gives me great pride to announce that my niece, Kylie Reeves, will be managing Natalie Carter's medical clinic under our corporate partnership. She brings fresh vision and family values into the business." His gaze found me across the room, and for a brief moment I glimpsed satisfaction in his eyes. "And of course," he added with a slight smirk, "Natalie will retain 25% of the profit." Applause filled the room. Executives clapped as if they'd just witnessed a promotion instead of a theft. My stomach turned as Kylie flashed her practiced smile, already victorious. The moment had arrived. With steady hands that betrayed none of the anger churning inside me, I reached for my briefcase. I didn't rush. That was important. As the applause continued and Kylie began to speak about her vision for modernization, I methodically opened my briefcase, removed the folder containing the contract, and rose from my seat. Several heads turned as I began walking toward the head table, but the attention remained primarily on Kylie's rehearsed speech about digital transformation and market expansion. Jonathan noticed me first. His expression shifted from smugness to confusion as I approached. By the time I reached the head table, Kylie had faltered mid-sentence, her practiced poise slipping as she registered my presence. I placed my leather briefcase on the table, the sound drawing attention from nearby executives. With deliberate movements, I flicked open the clasps and pulled out the contract. The room hadn't fully quieted yet. Pockets of applause and conversation continued, but a circle of silence was spreading outward from our position. With steady hands, I slid the document toward James Porter, who sat to Jonathan's right. Clause 4.3, I said, my voice clear and calm despite the adrenaline coursing through me, states that full ownership rights remain mine, and no family member can assume a management position without unanimous board approval. I looked directly at Jonathan, holding his gaze. And Jonathan, you are not on the board. The silence that followed was absolute. James Porter adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and nodded after scanning the highlighted section. She's correct. The contract is binding. Jonathan froze. His jaw clenched, his face drained of color. The mighty CEO, the man who had just humiliated me in front of 100 executives, had nothing to say. Kylie's victorious smile slipped, replaced by confusion and then embarrassment as she looked frantically between her uncle and the lawyer. There must be some misunderstanding, Jonathan finally managed, his voice tight. Our legal team has thoroughly reviewed the partnership agreement. Yes, they have, I agreed, maintaining eye contact. And your own lawyer just confirmed what I'm saying. I maintain full ownership. No family member can assume management without approval from the board, which consists of myself, Dr. Marcus Way, and Eliza Sharma. None of us approved this appointment. A murmur rippled through the room as executives and investors processed this unexpected development. I could see calculations happening behind their eyes, reassessments of Jonathan's competence, his honesty, his attention to detail. This is hardly the venue to discuss contract technicalities, Jonathan attempted, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to his supporters. We can address any concerns privately after our celebration. This venue was your choice, not mine, I replied evenly. You chose to announce a management change that violates our legally binding agreement in front of your colleagues and investors. I'm simply providing factual correction. Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I spotted Dr. Chen watching with undisguised interest, while an elderly man I recognized as a major healthcare investor frowned deeply, scribbling notes on a cocktail napkin. James. Porter cleared his throat again. Perhaps we should adjourn to discuss this matter privately. I don't think that's necessary, I said, reaching into my briefcase again and removing a second folder, the one Laura had provided with the financial projections. While we're providing clarifications, I believe your investors might be interested in reviewing the actual financial structure of our partnership. Jonathan's eyes widened slightly. That information is proprietary. Not according to our agreement, I countered, opening the folder. Clause 7.2 specifically states that all financial reporting must be transparent and available to all parties, including the board. Since I'm both owner and board member, I have full rights to discuss these projections. I placed the financial documents on the table, angled so that nearby executives could glimpse the contents. These show that while Reeves Healthcare has been reporting network services fees of 35% to investors, the actual extraction from clinic revenue is nearly 60%. Additionally, the projections for next quarter include eliminating services for low-income patients and cutting clinical staff, while increasing executive compensation. The room erupted in whispers. Jonathan's face flushed deep red as he attempted to gather the papers, but the damage was done. Several investors were already on their feet, moving toward the table with expressions ranging from curiosity to alarm. These documents were not approved for distribution, Jonathan hissed, abandoning his public persona. Neither was the announcement of my clinic's new management, I replied calmly. An older woman stepped forward. Marion Blackwell, I later learned, a major healthcare investor with a reputation for ethical business practices. Mr. Reeves, are these figures accurate? They differ substantially from what was presented in last quarter's investment prospectus. Jonathan's composure cracked further. Ms. Blackwell, I assure you these numbers lack proper context. If you'll allow me to— The numbers speak for themselves, I interrupted, addressing the growing crowd around our table, as do the patient outcome metrics, which have been exceptional despite the financial extractions. Imagine what could be achieved if resources were properly allocated to patient care rather than executive compensation. Dr. Chen stepped forward, examining the financial sheets with a clinical eye. These projections show elimination of your pediatric development program, the one showing such promising results for early intervention in motor delays? Yes, I confirmed, along with our senior wellness initiative and community outreach services. The room's energy had shifted completely. What had begun as a celebration of corporate expansion had transformed into an impromptu audit of Reeves Healthcare's business practices. Investors clustered around the financial documents, asking pointed questions that Jonathan struggled to answer coherently. Throughout it all, Kylie remained frozen at the podium, forgotten in the unfolding drama, her prepared speech about visionary leadership rendered absurd by the revelation that she had no legal authority to lead anything. James Porter quietly closed the contract folder and slid it back toward me. "The clause is indeed binding," he murmured, low enough that only I could hear. "I advised against this approach from the beginning." I nodded slightly, acknowledging his position without absolving him of his role in enabling Jonathan's schemes. As I gathered my documents and returned them to my briefcase, I felt a strange calm descend. The confrontation I had feared for weeks had happened, and I was still standing. Jonathan was now surrounded by concerned investors, his voice rising as he attempted to regain control of the narrative. These are complex business structures that require context. Carter Rehabilitation is just one small part of our network. A profitable part, Marion Blackwell noted dryly, that you appear to have misrepresented in multiple ways. I closed my briefcase with a decisive click, the sound drawing Jonathan's attention back to me momentarily. His eyes narrowed, a silent promise that this wasn't over. But it was. In that moment, with the evidence laid bare and the power dynamics fundamentally altered, I knew that, whatever came next, I would no longer be fighting from a position of weakness. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said quietly, and walked away from the head table with my head held high. As I moved through the ballroom, several people approached me, some with business cards, others with questions about my clinical methodologies, a few simply to express their respect for what they had witnessed. By the time I reached the exit, I had collected more genuine professional connections than in all the corporate networking events Jonathan had insisted I attend over the past year. Laura intercepted me near the door, her expression a mixture of admiration and concern. "That was magnificent," she whispered. "But there will be consequences. Jonathan doesn't lose gracefully." "I know," I replied, "but neither do I." The morning after the dinner, I arrived at the clinic earlier than usual, unsure what to expect. Would Jonathan have changed the locks overnight? Sent security to bar my entrance? Called an emergency board meeting to attempt damage control? To my surprise, the building was quiet, operations proceeding as normal. Staff greeted me with their usual warmth, though a few exchanged meaningful glances that suggested news of last night's confrontation had already spread. My office remained untouched, but a small envelope sat centered on my desk, my name written in Laura's neat handwriting. Inside was a single note card. "Emergency executive meeting called at Reeves HQ 10 a.m. Jay is scrambling. 3 investors have requested immediate financial reviews. Stay strong. L.I.A." Smiled, tucking the card into my drawer. Then I got to work, reviewing patient files and treatment plans as if it were any other day. The normalcy felt deliberate, an act of reclamation. This was my clinic, doing the work that mattered regardless of corporate drama. At noon, my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. "Natalie Carter speaking." "Miss Carter, this is Marion Blackwell." The investor's voice was crisp, authoritative. "I hope I'm not interrupting your clinical work." "Not at all, Ms. Blackwell. How can I help you?" "I believe the question is how I can help you." A pause. "I've spent the morning reviewing your clinic's financials in detail. Impressive clinical outcomes, efficient operations, strong community reputation, all despite Reeves Healthcare's excessive extractions. I'd like to discuss alternative partnership structures that might better serve your mission." My heart raced. "I'm listening." "I represent a healthcare investment group focused on sustainable, ethical practices. We believe quality care and financial viability aren't mutually exclusive. Perhaps we could meet later this week?" By the time I hung up, I had a Friday appointment with Blackwell's group and a renewed sense of possibility. The clinic's future wasn't limited to either independence or exploitation. There might be a middle path that provided resources without compromise. Later that afternoon, James Porter appeared at my office door, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the clinical setting. "Ms. Carter, do you have a moment?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk, noting how out of place his expensive suit looked among the medical equipment and anatomy charts. "Jonathan Reeves has instructed me to discuss settlement options," he began, opening his leather portfolio. "He's prepared to—" "I'm not interested in settlements," I interrupted. "The contract is clear. I retain full ownership and clinical authority." Porter sighed. "Ms. Carter, business partnerships are rarely so black and white. While Clause 4.3 is indeed binding, there are other elements of the agreement that could be subject to interpretation." "Are you threatening litigation, Mr. Porter?" "I'm suggesting that protracted legal battles benefit neither party. Reeves Healthcare has invested significantly in this clinic's expansion and received substantial returns on that investment," I countered. "The financial documents make that abundantly clear." Porter removed his glasses, polishing them slowly. "Jonathan is unsettled by last night's events. Several major investors have expressed concerns. 3 have requested emergency financial reviews of all Reeves Healthcare properties." I couldn't help but smile. "That sounds like a Jonathan problem, not a Natalie problem." "He's willing to renegotiate terms," Porter continued, ignoring my comment. "Increased profit share, removal of Kylie from any management consideration, reinstatement of your exclusive clinical authority, and the community programs, the pediatric developmental services, the senior wellness initiative." Porter hesitated. "Those would be subject to profitability review. Then we have—" "Nothing to discuss," I said, standing. "The programs stay. My authority was never Jonathan's to reinstate. It remained mine legally, despite his attempts to undermine it. And Kylie's removal isn't a concession. It's compliance with an existing agreement." "Ms. Carter, I have patients waiting, Mr. Porter. Please tell Jonathan that I expect full compliance with our original agreement, including transparent financial reporting and respect for clinical decisions. If he can't provide that, I'm open to discussing an exit strategy. For Reeves Healthcare, not for me." After Porter left, I called an all-staff meeting. It was time for transparency. "Many of you have heard rumors about last night's investor dinner," I began, facing the assembled team in our largest treatment room. "I want to clarify what's happening and what it means for our clinic." Over the next 30 minutes, I explained the situation honestly. The contract violations, the financial manipulations, the attempted management coup, and the current uncertainty. I emphasized that patient care remained our priority, regardless of corporate politics. "I can't promise there won't be changes," I concluded. "But I can promise that I'll fight to protect what matters: our patients, our clinical integrity, and the team we've built." Jen, who'd been with me since the beginning, spoke up. "Just tell us what you need, Nat. We're with you." The unanimous nods around the room brought tears to my eyes. In building this clinic, I'd created more than a business. I'd created a community. That evening, Laura called with news. "Jonathan's in full crisis mode. 2 board members are questioning his leadership. Blackwell's group has requested full financial audits of all Reeves properties, and 3 other clinic owners have contacted legal, asking about their contract terms." He's built his business on these partnerships, I realized. If they all start questioning the arrangements— Exactly. You've created a domino effect. And there's more. Kylie resigned this afternoon. Apparently she hadn't realized her position wasn't actually legitimate. I laughed despite myself. How did Jonathan take that? Not well. He's looking for someone to blame. Be careful, Natalie. He's dangerous when cornered. Her warning proved prescient. The next morning, I arrived to find our electronic medical record system locked, with a message indicating billing verification required. Our scheduling software was similarly frozen. Patients were waiting in the reception area looking confused as our front desk staff struggled to check them in with paper forms. "System-wide update," explained the Reeves IT representative who answered our urgent call. "Should be restored within 48 to 72 hours once verification is complete." It was sabotage, pure and simple, an attempt to cripple our operations and force me to the negotiating table. I refused to panic. "We've treated patients before electronic records," I told my team. "We'll adapt." And we did. Staff stayed late entering data manually. Therapists worked through lunch breaks to keep appointments on schedule. Patients showed remarkable understanding when explained the situation. By day's end, we had managed to see every scheduled patient, document all treatments, and maintain our standard of care despite the obstacles. As I was locking up, my phone rang. Dr. Marcus Way, my board member and referring physician. Natalie, I just got a strange call from Jonathan Reeves. He's offering me an exclusive referral contract with Boston General if I vote to approve management changes at your clinic. My blood ran cold. He's trying to buy your board vote. Yes, and rather clumsily. I recorded the conversation. I thought you should know he's targeting board members directly. Did you accept? Marcus laughed. I told him I don't respond well to bribery attempts and that I'd be notifying both you and the Medical Ethics Board about the inappropriate offer. After hanging up, I called Eliza, who confirmed she'd received a similar approach, an offer of a healthcare advocacy consultancy, with Reeves in exchange for her board support. Jonathan was getting desperate. The question was, what would he try next? I didn't have to wait long to find out. The following morning, Laura called, her voice tight with urgency. Jonathan's called an emergency. Investor meeting for tomorrow. He's presenting a restructuring plan that includes selling Carter Rehabilitation to a subsidiary corporation, technically complying with your ownership clause while effectively removing you from control. Can he do that? It's legally questionable, but by the time it's challenged in court, the damage would be done. Natalie, you need to be at that meeting. I wasn't invited. No, but I can get you in, and you won't be alone. The Reeves Healthcare Executive Boardroom intimidated by design. All dark wood, leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston's financial district. As Laura led me through the door, conversation stopped abruptly. Jonathan, standing at the head of the table with presentation materials, froze mid-gesture. Ms. Kim, this is a closed meeting, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. As HR director, I'm required to attend all discussions involving organizational restructuring, Laura replied calmly. And Ms. Carter, as a key stakeholder in the proposed transaction, has every right to be present. Before Jonathan could object, Marian Blackwell spoke from her seat near the front. I agree. If we're discussing the future of Carter Rehabilitation, its founder should certainly be part of the conversation. Several other investors nodded. The balance of power in the room was already shifting. Jonathan's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course. We were just reviewing the current partnership structure and exploring optimization opportunities. You mean you were explaining how to circumvent our contract by selling my clinic to a shell corporation? I said, taking an empty seat beside Marian Blackwell. Please, don't let me interrupt. A murmur ran through the assembled investors. Jonathan's expression hardened as he clicked to the next slide, a complex organizational chart showing Carter Rehabilitation being absorbed into a new entity called Reeves Innovation Partners. As I was explaining, he continued, his voice strained, this restructuring allows for more efficient resource allocation while maintaining all contractual obligations. Except for the obligation to honor my ownership and authority, I interjected. Clause 4.3 doesn't just protect against family management. It guarantees my position as owner and clinical director. James Porter shifted uncomfortably. Technically, the clause refers specifically to ownership rights and family management restrictions. It doesn't explicitly prevent organizational restructuring. And this is exactly the kind of legal hair-splitting that has undermined Reeves Healthcare's credibility, Laura said, opening a folder of her own. I've prepared a brief presentation on the ethics and financial implications of the proposed restructuring. Jonathan's face flushed. Ms. Kim, you are not authorized to... Actually, as HR director concerned about compliance issues, I am. She distributed documents to everyone at the table. These materials outline the regulatory risks, potential patient impact, and investor exposure should this restructuring proceed against the clear intent of the original partnership. Agreement. The room fell silent as investors reviewed the materials. I caught Laura's eye, silently thanking her for her courage. An older investor broke the silence. These compliance concerns are significant. The potential for regulatory investigation alone? These are hypothetical scenarios, Jonathan insisted, but his voice had lost its confidence. Marian Blackwell closed her folder, decisively. I've seen enough. Mr. Reeves, when I invested in your company, you emphasized ethical partnership models and practitioner-led care as core values. These restructuring efforts directly contradict those principles. Business evolution requires flexibility, Jonathan argued. Healthcare is changing. Yes, it is, I interrupted, standing to address the room. And that evolution should, be guided by clinical expertise and patient outcomes, not financial engineering. Carter Rehabilitation has succeeded because we prioritize quality care over quarterly returns. Our patient satisfaction scores are in the 98th percentile. Our clinical outcomes exceed industry standards by double digits. Our community programs serve populations that would otherwise go without essential rehabilitation services. I moved to the front of the room, taking a position beside Jonathan, but addressing the investors directly. I entered into partnership with Reeves Healthcare because I believed in the promise of resources without compromise. That promise has been broken repeatedly. Now, I'm offering a choice: honor the original agreement in both letter and spirit, or release Carter Rehabilitation from this partnership entirely. Release? Jonathan scoffed. The financial entanglements can be resolved, Marion Blackwell interjected. My group would be prepared to facilitate a clean separation, including refinancing any outstanding development costs, if that's what Ms. Carter prefers. Jonathan paled as other investors nodded agreement. This is highly irregular, he protested. We have contractual. Contracts work both ways, I reminded him. You've violated yours repeatedly. I'm offering a path forward that avoids prolonged legal battles and negative publicity for everyone involved. The room fell silent again as investors exchanged glances. Financial calculations were happening behind every pair of eyes, weighing the costs of a messy fight against the benefits of a clean resolution. Finally, a silver-haired investor spoke. Jonathan, I believe Ms. Carter's proposal merits serious consideration. The potential downside of contentious litigation, particularly given the documentation Ms. Kim has provided, poses significant shareholder risk. One by one, other investors voiced similar perspectives. The tide had turned decisively. Jonathan's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly, the gesture of a man recognizing defeat. Perhaps we should take a short recess to consider our options, he suggested, a final attempt to regain control of the situation. I don't think that's necessary, Marion Blackwell responded. The path forward seems quite clear. Reeves Healthcare will honor the original agreement with Carter Rehabilitation, with full transparency and adherence to all clauses, or it will facilitate an amicable separation with appropriate financial adjustments. The choice is yours, Mr. Reeves. Put so plainly, before a room of his most important investors, Jonathan had no real choice at all. We'll honor the original agreement, he conceded, his voice flat. Full ownership and clinical authority remain with Ms. Carter. No family management, appointments, transparent financial reporting. I'll have legal draft the appropriate documentation. And the system lockouts? I pressed. Our EMR and scheduling software have been mysteriously updating since yesterday. Jonathan glanced at James Porter, who nodded slightly. Those systems will be fully restored by end of business today. And the community programs? The pediatric development? Services? The senior wellness initiative? A muscle twitched in Jonathan's jaw. Clinical decisions remain under your authority, as per the original agreement. It was victory, complete and public. As the meeting adjourned, several investors approached to introduce themselves, expressing admiration for both my clinical work and my handling of the partnership challenges. Marion Blackwell lingered, offering her card with a direct number. Whether you stay or go, my offer stands, she said quietly. There are partnership models that respect practitioner leadership while providing necessary resources. When you're ready to discuss alternatives, call me. Jonathan remained at the table, staring at his scattered presentation materials as the room emptied. When only he, Laura, and I remained, he finally spoke. This isn't over, Natalie. Actually, it is, I replied, gathering my things. You tried to take what wasn't yours, and you failed. The choice now is whether you can be a legitimate business partner or a cautionary tale in healthcare investment circles. As Laura and I walked toward the door, Jonathan called after us. Why did you do it, Laura, after 5 years with this company? Laura paused, turning back to face him. Because healthcare should be about healing, not quarterly returns. Because partnership should mean mutual respect, not exploitation. And because sometimes doing the right thing matters more than job security. With that, we left Jonathan Reeves sitting alone in his expensive boardroom, surrounded by the remnants of his failed takeover attempt. In the months that followed, Carter Rehabilitation thrived under the restored partnership terms. With transparent financial reporting and full clinical authority, I expanded our community programs and specialized services. Our reputation grew, attracting top clinical talent and patient referrals from across New England. Jonathan kept his distance, interacting with the clinic exclusively through properly channels and formal communications. Kylie disappeared from the healthcare scene entirely, last heard pursuing an entrepreneurial opportunity in Los Angeles. Laura Kim received 3 job offers within weeks of the confrontation, but chose to remain with Reeves Healthcare. Someone needs to keep an eye on things from the inside, she explained when I asked why she stayed. Besides, watching Jonathan have to play by the rules is surprisingly satisfying. 6 months after the boardroom showdown, I sat in my office reviewing quarterly outcomes with my expanded clinical team. Pediatric developmental cases showed remarkable improvement rates. Senior patients were maintaining independence longer. Post-surgical recovery times continued to beat national averages. Eliza knocked on my door, interrupting my review. "There's someone here to see you. Says she's a patient from your first year." I looked up to see an elderly woman with a walker, her face vaguely familiar. "Mrs. Abernathy?" I stood, recognizing her at last. "It's been years." 5 years, she corrected, making her way slowly to a chair. "I was your Tuesday afternoon appointment for hip rehabilitation back when this place was just 3 rooms and a dream." I smiled, remembering. "You brought me homemade cookies every session." "Snickerdoodles," she nodded. "My grandson drove me past your old building last week. Said you'd moved to this fancy new place. I wanted to see for myself what became of that determined young woman who gave me back my independence." Mrs. Abernathy looked around my office, taking in the certificates, the expanded treatment areas visible through the windows, the staff moving purposefully through the clinic. "You built something special here," she said simply. "Something that matters." Her words struck me more powerfully than any investor validation or professional accolade. This moment of genuine human connection, of healing recognized and valued, this was why I'd fought so hard. "I did," I agreed, tears pricking my eyes. "And no one can take it away." That evening, as I locked up the clinic, I paused to look at the sign above the door. Carter Rehabilitation and Wellness. My name, my vision, my life's work. The journey had been harder than I'd ever imagined when I first dreamed of opening my own practice. There had been sacrifices, setbacks, and moments when surrender seemed the sensible choice. But standing there in the gathering dusk, I knew with absolute certainty that I'd made the right decision in fighting for what was mine. True ownership isn't just about contracts or profits. It's about claiming your worth, setting boundaries, and never letting anyone rewrite the story you've sacrificed everything to build. That night in the ballroom, when I'd opened my briefcase and changed the course of my professional life, wasn't just about a legal clause or a business agreement. It was about reclaiming my voice, my vision, and my value. And that, more than any material success, was the real victory.